Hello, this is Ken Ferrie with this week's Boots in the Field report. Wow, what a difference a week makes in everyone's outlook. This is why we never walk away from a growing crop. As I mentioned in the last podcast, we started irrigating the corn here on the college campus, and that usually brings rain, once we go to all the work to pull out our primitive irrigation system. Sure looks like the plan worked. Most of our customer base has received multiple substantial rains this week. Now, there'll be no charge for bringing that first round of rain, but if we got to pull this irrigation system out again, we'll have to look at some kind of installment plan. In several places, the big rain did bring some wind with it. We had property damage here locally in the Hayworth-Wapella area. At our branch operation over in Ursa Co-op, Matt had some of the higher winds as that derecho reached 100 plus miles an hour. So let's check in with Matt. Well, Matt, I appreciate you taking some time to kind of catch us up to speed today on what's happening over there at our branch office. We did get roughed up here with the derecho type winds, I guess you would say, on Thursday. Did some property damage. I got enough firewood at my house for a long time now. The amount of trees it took down in Wapella, Illinois got beat up. We had some damage as a tornado went over the top of it. But seeing the pictures that you've been sending in of the corn and property damage, I guess mainly to the northern part of your territory, it looked like that was a pretty rough deal. Can you kind of give us an outline of what you're seeing over there?
Yeah, we kind of saw that most of the damage start northeast Missouri around Cahokia, cut across the southeast tip of Iowa, and then kind of run that from US 136 corridor up to Illinois Route 9. Kind of just took a swath there west to east, and a lot of grain bins damaged, a lot of flattened corn, a lot of power lines snapped off. A lot of guys that were without power up there for 3, 4, 5 days. So definitely had a rough stretch for them, and probably didn't bring enough rain for some of those folks to be worth the damage. But for others, the rain was very welcomed and has kind of turned things around a little bit. Guys are picking their heads up. We were in a D3 extreme drought for a lot of areas, and so this has given a lot of guys hope. And now they're starting to think about APH yields instead of crop insurance payments. Granted, it's still going to take some rain. And on the tougher water limited acres, we definitely lost a little more potential. But a lot of guys are just looking at potential based on the height of the corn, right? And that is a little bit skewed from our perspective, because over here, last year, we had 14 inches of rain from April 1st to July 1st. And this year we're dealing with 3.5 to 4. So we had this monstrous 10 to 12 foot corn last year. This year you can walk through a tasseled corn without getting hit in the face with leaves or tassels. So 5 to 6 foot tall corn. But pulling some of those ears, we're still seeing that there's not a lot of difference in the ear size. As this stuff starts to silk and push out those ears. So I think there's a lot of potential there. We got the rains. We need to keep getting the rains, but we've got to watch this crop, and especially watch how that flattened corn stands back up and pollinates, which here we're a week later, getting reports from the guys up in that derecho area that a lot of that flat corn has started to turn and straighten back up and get some of those ears upright, where we shouldn't have as much issues with pollination like we would with some of those fields that were fully tasseled right at that time.
Those fields that were fully tasseled, were they just in the middle of pollination, or had pollination, and I assume we're talking here about the earlier April corn, did it get pollinated before the storm, or was it right in the thick of it when that storm come through?
I think most of that corn up there, probably the earliest stuff, was just starting to get into pollination. And that's where I think we're maybe going to struggle on some of those fields, and we need to watch them because I think it could be a challenge to get all of those silks, get pollen to all those silks when they're overlapped and covered up with leaves and stalks, because we're only going to shed pollen for so many days, right? So the fields that are 2 to 3 leaves from tassel, when that wind event comes through, it's got a little bit more time to straighten up and get everything upright to get that pollinated. But pretty amazing what the corn plants can do if they have a little bit of time to do it. Majority of the fields were in that 2 to 3 leaf before tassel. But of course, driving around the country side up in that area, there's scattered fields here and there that you could see were well ahead and into pollination when the storm came through.
Did you see much green snap out of it, or did most of it just get laid over?
Some of the tops snapped out on fields, but for the most part, we've had weak roots up in that area, and really a lot of areas because of the dry weather. So a lot of this is leaned over at the base. The plant's still fully intact, other than probably a few roots ripped out right at the base, but going to be some tops snapped out too.
I noticed that here. Probably the rootless corn drought syndrome buffered it a little bit because this corn laid over, but by Monday a lot of it was straightened back up. I think it'd be a challenge maybe to run a ground rig through, but if you didn't realize a storm went through, you probably wouldn't notice it. So a lot of it's got a gooseneck in it, but she's she's got that tassel back up there. So in that 3 leaves before tassel, you get a storm like that, it's not uncommon to have a crazy amount of green snap when that corn is brittle and growing good. In this case, I think the drought condition maybe helped us from experiencing a lot of green snap, but maybe some of your guys, if they had green snap insurance and it went down to pollination, they would rather have that.
Right.
What kind of rainy amounts did you see then across your territory?
Probably on the light end, 1.5 to 2 inches total in a week's time frame. On the heavy end, there's actually some places that had some flash flood warnings that picked up 2-3 inches pretty quick, and in those areas may have seen a total of 7. So I would say 2 to 7 inches, probably more commonly 3 to 4 in the past that week, from the day of the derecho, the 29th, to the following Thursday. And it came in several different rains. So it really rains couldn't come at a better time here, right as majority of this corn is starting to push silks right ahead of pollination.
Yeah. What are you seeing outside of the derecho area as far as what are you seeing in the crop over there now?
So the tasseling and silking has definitely been or followed the emergence of these fields. So if we have fields that were uniform emerging early on, they've been pretty uniform to tassel heading into pollination. Fields where you had certain soil types that were behind that emergence, you had late emergers from some of that April planted corn in cooler weather. We can see that from above, especially with a drone picture on where those areas are. They're the same areas that are behind in tasseling. So it's going to spread out and delay our pollination a little bit on a whole field standpoint. So we're kind of looking at that for fungicide decisions on making sure that the whole field is getting pollinated, because we're watching for things like Japanese beetles and rootworm beetles and some of those silk clippers out there to see whether we need to add an insecticide into that pass, if we're making it. But from the corn standpoint, other than a lot of short corn in the area, I think there's a lot of potential. I think that our risk went up with shorter plants. We don't have as much reserves on board the stalk to carry us into grain fill. So Mother Nature's got to do a little bit more heavy lifting for us this year going into later July and August. But I think it's too early to throw in the towel on a lot of this corn. I think we got to be realistic about our expectations. We're probably not going to see the yields here like we did last year on corn. But I think APH, and we kind of talked about that, is probably still realistic for a lot of these fields.
What
On
is
the bean side, we got a lot of beans that are into full flower now. We have had spider mites in the area. I've seen them mainly showing up on the west side of a house or a mowed lawn in a bean field. So we've actually sprayed, had some fields sprayed for spider mites um, last couple of days. So the rains and the cooler temperatures should help moderate that problem. Um, but the spider mites that are there aren't necessarily going to go away. It's going to take some time for that fungus that's a natural predator, that population to build back up to get these under control. So if we've got some large spots out there that are dealing with spider mites, we got to make sure we get them under control, treat them with something like a bifenthrin or a dimethoate product to knock them down.
Scouts can't take their eye off that insect just yet, or the mite just yet, on the basis that could be 2 weeks before Mother Nature corrects that, population that's out there for the mites.
Right.
How do you feel about the bean yields where you sit right now, as far as getting some early flowering and pre-solstice flowering and stuff? Are we sitting in pretty good shape over there on the bean side?
Yeah, I'd say a lot of these beans got planted right with the corn. A lot of that in early April, some of it before the corn was planted. So we did hit early flowering. Of course, they were slow growing, slow to canopy because of the dry weather. These are going to be some short beans come harvest. But we all know that the potential for beans is mostly fulfilled in August with the rains we get to finish it out. We're probably not going to have the pod set or the node set that we're used to because of that dry weather. But I think above APH is still reachable at this point with beans. Like I said, we just got to have Mother Nature come through in late July and August. But they're finally starting to look a lot better. We've got 15-inch rows have been closed now for a couple weeks. The 20s are getting closed now. 30s are, there may be some 30-inch rows in the dry areas that don't close the rows. So we'll have to watch those for weeds. But this rain has definitely perked things up, get these beans to bush out and grow a little bit more. So we gain a little bit more of that potential.
Yeah, so this weather front is definitely taking the pressure off. I don't know, as you look at the forecast, it looks like maybe we've had a change. It's easier for them to put rain in the forecast above 20% chance and stuff. But we are going to need it. We're going to need it to walk us on out. It's a little nerve-wracking when they're just-in-time rains versus keeping the tank full and letting you roll through. But I appreciate you taking the time today, Matt, to kind of get us up to speed of what's going on over there. And a lot of guys have been asking, a lot of guys have been seeing some of the same pictures that you've been sending of the damage. So it really, our kind of heart goes out for those guys. This is a tough time to be having to figure out how you're going to get your bins and machine sheds and stuff put back together, plus knowing that you took a pretty good hit in the crop. So thank goodness for crop insurance, because you just don't know when that's around the corner, from 1 week to the next.
Yep, there's definitely been a lot of cleanup effort going up there, neighbors helping neighbors, guys with skid loaders and excavators cleaning up, picking up metal that's strung across bean fields for a half mile. So, amidst all the damage, it's nice to see some of that taking place.
Yeah, like a farmer taking care of farmers. Well, I appreciate your time, Matt. Thanks a bunch.
Yep.
Getting a lot of calls about how short and uneven the corn is this year, and growers are wondering what that means to yield. First, I don't know if it helps, but you're not alone. Katie and I traveled to Blooming Prairie, Minnesota to visit some customers on Friday. Before the 4th, the whole trip up and back, we saw short corn and ununiform fields. The uniform fields are the ones that actually caught your eye. Dealing with short corn first, as this drought dragged on, plants stacked nodes. Part is a defense and part is trying to stay on time with pollination. Most hybrids have the correct number of leaves, but the distance between nodes is a lot tighter. All corn with the tassel out will stay short as the vegetative stages have finished. The May planted corn that is 2 to 4 leaves to tassel will see a big jump in its height after this rain. There's not a good correlation between plant height and yield, especially if we capture 95% of the sunlight. We can plant narrow row corn and push populations up, which can cause the hybrid to get 2 foot taller than normal, but many times it doesn't add yield either. How this shorter corn yields will play out based on future weather and hybrid characteristics. When the corn is pushed the tassel out, go out there in the field, squat down, and check for sunlight capture. If at high sun you're capturing 95% of the light, that short corn will have little effect on yield. If you're only catching 80% of the sunlight, what happens depends on how the rest of the season plays out. If it turns out hot and dry at the end of July and August, this penetration of sunlight will create trouble for the hybrid and it could burn up. In this case, the upright leafed hybrids will take it the hardest. Like 2012, when the pendulum leaf hybrids were 100 to 150 bushel higher in the fall. The pendulum hybrids were able to continue catching sunlight and shade the row. Pendulum hybrids at lower population is a good way to weatherproof your drought risk acres. If you have a lot of sunlight hitting the ground, and we have normal rainfall in July and August, any hybrid that has not lost its suckers yet will attempt to put an ear at the tassel of these suckers. Hybrids without suckers will attempt to shoot 2 or 3 ears. And with the long drawn out pollination process this year, they'll get pollinated. Some of these second ears could put on grain. So we need to watch this as we set our combines. Don't let it get through the stripper plates. Every little bit helps. Most likely though, they'll get to milk stage and abort. Now this will leave an ear, a rotting ear, that is food for stalk rot right below your good ear. Watch for this when you're doing the push test for standability at harvest. If we find weak stalks, we need to push up the harvest. The other factor of very unevenness in this corn is also found in most fields. This is especially evident in some fields as they start to tassel. We have uneven height and uneven pushing of the tassels coming out. The question is, how do I do an estimated ear count in these fields? Are these shorter ones or later pollinating plants going to put on an ear? We tell you anything that gets more than a collar behind its row mate will not put on an ear. This concept refers to how the plants emerge in the front of the season. Late emerging plants are not the same age as the older plants, which causes a lot of antagonism to the younger plant and will eventually abort the ear. We can tell these plants easy because the stalk diameter is usually 2/3 or less of the normal plants. This year, the fields emerged uniformly, but as they came up and went into rapid growth stage, they started to become ununiform. The cause of the ununiform growth is triggered by the drought, specifically poor crown root development. Many fields we visit, the short plants are missing 1 and up to 3 nodes of crown roots. Many are missing the 4th and the 5th set of crown roots. Those that did set the 3rd set before it got too dry are the taller plants. Those that had only set 2 sets of crown roots developed stacked nodes, they're tighter together, and ended up shorter and behind in pollination timing. The difference between these plants and the late emergers is that the plants are the same age. They emerged at the same time. You can tell that by the stalk diameter. There is very little difference between stalk diameter of a taller and a shorter plant. Now with the rains, we will see an explosion of roots around the crown, giving it kind of a bit of a grassy look when you dig them up. These plants will still produce viable ears. There will be a variation in ear height this fall due to the stacking of the nodes. In some cases, poor crown root development may have saved some of this May corn from the damage in the derecho. Normally, wind like that at the rapid growth stage triggers a lot of green snap calls due to brittle corn in rapid growth. Most of this rootless corn laid down on Thursday's storm and stood back up by Monday with a slight goosenecking at the bottom of the stalk. We have many short beans out there too. Most that we were in the past week are in the R1, R2, be moving into R3 this week. This means the beans will double in size, especially with this rain. With that said, doubling some of these 30-inch rows will not get us a tight canopy. Canopies that don't close in wide rows tend to leave yield on the table and give us a lot of weed pressure to deal with. This rain will bring a weed flush and make the existing water hemp that's out there take off like a rocket. With beans in that R2 heading into R3, be careful with your rescue sprays so you don't blow off the pods and flowers that are out there. Look at your crop rotation restrictions on your respray products so we don't create a problem for next year. Make sure the weed pressure is a yield robbing event. In these non-GMO beans, one might look to walking or row crop cultivating to clean them up. This past week, doing farm visits, Trey and I saw several things of concern. As Matt said, we did see some spider mites in the Quincy area and a few in Tazewell County. In the Winchester area, we did find aphid colonies in the corn, and this corn was pollinating. We found winged aphids in the corn at Melvin, Illinois, meaning that the aphids are moving in, but we didn't find any colonies that had started over there. We also found soybean aphids in the Melvin area at the base of the bean plants. Both the mites and the aphids are the aftermath of dry weather, which took out their predators, especially the fungus. As humidity has come back and we're seeing morning dews, I expect natural predators to rebuild and help us out here. But be careful with your fungicide applications so they don't flare the aphids or the mite. Let's scout these fields before spraying. I'd throw an insecticide in with the fungicide pass to give you a little protection. If you've already sprayed the fungicide, get out there and scout these fields for the next 3 weeks to make sure that we don't have an outbreak of the aphid. Seeing and getting reports of heavy concentrations of Japanese beetle in soybeans and fruit trees. They are now moving to the pollinating cornfields, so pest teams keep up on the scouting. It's going to take a bit to get these crops pollinated. Don't let them take out the late pollinators. Unlike other years, late pollinating plants this year do have the possibility to put on ears. The most disturbing thing we saw this week was tar spot. We saw that south of Jacksonville. If you look at the Illinois drought map, the one area that stayed out of the drought rating down there in Greene and Macoupin County is where we found it. Now, this was an exceptionally good looking field due to timely rains. Almost every plant had tar spot on the lower leaves. The field was also heavy with Japanese beetle pressure, and it was feeding on pollen and silks. The grower was going to spray the tar spot and take out the beetles as well. Now, the grower scouted neighboring fields for us and said the only one that showed the tar spot at the time was the one we're in, but it was in multiple locations within that field everywhere we looked. For us to see tar spot on those leaves means the field had to be infected at least 2 weeks ago. Now, based on the location of the tar spot on the bottom of the plant, would suggest that this is homegrown tar spot that was in the field 2 years ago. Would suggest anyone farming in that little sweet spot where the rain came more often, that we need to be doing some serious scouting. Anybody that's got corn under irrigation, it's time. This is kind of a shot across the bow. We need to start looking at the base of that plant for this tar spot. Besides this surprising finding of a tar spot, most fields are exceptionally clean of disease. I do expect that to change now that we have the moisture to work with. Probably take about 2 weeks and we'll start to notice disease pressure building in most fields. I've been working with Trey the past couple of weeks to get him trained up to be able to collect the data that we're going to need for the virtual farm visit, the farm visit program, as well as we've been testing software for the project. I am excited about rolling this product out to farm and retail customers, giving us a chance to get into more customers' fields and identify issues that need attention. Again, if you want more information or want to try the virtual farm visit, just call the office and they'll get your fields signed up so we can pick the deep dive sites that we're going to work with. For Crop Tech customers, don't forget that our field day is July 20th. Looks like a good sign up already. The day will be packed with a lot of material and some live tillage. Come early to catch our annual round robin crop report. It should be an interesting one this year. I want to invite all podcast listeners to the Farm Journal Corn Soybean College, July 25th, 26th, here at Illinois, Hayworth, Illinois. To see an agenda and get signed up, go to our website at croptechinc.com and click on the Corn College tab. To stay up to date, check out our website at croptechinc.com and subscribe to our podcast, Boots in the Field Report. Keep her safe, keep her moving.